What are the best cameras for adapted lenses?
Selecting the right camera for your adapted lenses is a very important decision, because if you make a mistake and down the road you decide to change to another camera, it's going to be very time-consuming and very expensive for you. So to help you decide on which of the many, many digital cameras to buy, I will share with you my 3-step process that I go through in deciding which digital camera is right for me. Step 1, decide whether you want a mirrorless camera or a DSLR camera. The DSLR cameras have been around for a long time. Both DSLRs and the new mirrorless have their own advantages and disadvantages. As you can tell, I shoot both of them, and frankly, I like both of them. There are excellent characteristics of mirrorless, and likewise there are excellent characteristics that DSLRs have that mirrorless don't have that I also like. But that's the first decision you need to make. And these days, the trend seems to be mirrorless. Mirrorless cameras are selling more than DSLRs, and it's kind of the future. So if I had to start all over again from scratch, I'd go with a mirrorless camera body. Second step, determine what sensor size to get. Do you want a small micro 4/3 sensor camera? Do you want a medium-sized APS-C camera like this Fuji? Or do you want a full-sized, full-frame camera like this Pentax? Micro 4/3 APS-C in the middle or the larger full-frame? Well, there are a lot of reasons why I think a full-frame is the best decision, because most adapted lenses are full-frame lenses, and you'll get a better balance, the same depth of field, the same field of view, and they're easy and relatively cheap to adapt. So, all things considered, I would pick a full-frame sensor in my camera. My second choice would be micro 4/3. And the reason I say that is because if you take a micro 4/3 camera, like this little Panasonic, and you put a Metabone speed booster on it, you are going to have the full frame goodness of your lens on micro 4/3, plus it'll be faster and it'll be sharper. We'll talk more about these Metabone's fabulous Metabone speed boosters in an upcoming episode, but that would be my second choice. Step number 3, decide which brand you want. Now, when it comes to micro 4/3, there are basically 2 manufacturers, Olympus and Panasonic. Olympus pretty much is having financial problems and recently got bought out. I'd get a Panasonic if I was getting micro 4/3. APS-C, there's a lot of folks who make APS-C. The 2 largest are Fuji and Sony. I would go with Fuji if I was buying an APS-C camera, because I think Sony these days is more focusing on full frame. So Fuji if you get an APS-C camera. And if you choose a full frame sensor camera, there are a lot of camera companies that make full frame size cameras. And I guess the 2 big ones, the 2 most profitable, the 2 growing companies are Sony and Canon. Sony, I don't care for their color science. I don't care for their ergonomics. They're more of a consumer products manufacturer. Camera companies, the largest is Canon. They have a great history, lots of old lenses to adapt. So if I was going with full frame mirrorless, I would choose a Canon right now. So there you go. My first choice, if I had to start over again, would be a mirrorless full frame camera from Canon. Okay, now that you've picked out your sensor size and the brand of camera you're going to buy, let's talk about some key features. Features that I think you're going to want for your adapted lenses. The first one is you don't want an AA filter, an anti-aliasing filter. That's because the lenses that you're adapting, the old vintage lenses, are not as sharp as modern lenses. And therefore, you certainly don't want a sharpness-robbing AA filter on your camera body. Second, you want a fast shutter speed, mechanical shutter speed of 1/4000th, or if you can get it, 1/8000th. And electronic shutters are nice to go even faster if needed, and they go up to 1/16,000th. And I even read that a new one coming out from Sony has a shutter speed of up to 1/32,000th of a second. Those are really handy, especially when you're shooting fast vintage lenses, wide open or at wide apertures during the daylight. Another feature that I like is good focus peaking, because most of your adapted lenses are going to be manual focusing, and focus peaking will help you nail the critical focus. Now, I really like Fuji focus peaking. It's about the best in my opinion. Live view, because you're going to be very often focusing your camera on the back side using the LCD screen on the back side. And you want an LCD screen on the back of your camera that is large and has high resolution. What do I mean by large? 3 inches, 3.2 inches, and as high a resolution as you can get. That way, when you are focusing using the LCD screen on the back in the live view mode, you are going to be able to have a really good picture to focus on. IBIS, in-body image stabilization, you want, because vintage lenses don't have stabilization built into the lens itself. Therefore, you want a camera with the image stabilization built into that. And finally, you have to pick between CCD sensors and CMOS sensors. CCD type sensors are generally older cameras, and what I have found is that from a color standpoint, if you match a vintage lens with their color characteristics with a CCD sensor, it produces vibrant and really rich colors that I personally really love. So of all the cameras that I own, I'd probably say that 80% of them are CCD sensor cameras. Now, all of us have a limited amount of money to spend on a camera, or at least most of us do. I do, certainly. And you're going to want to look for bargains out there. And when it comes to spending money on cameras, not only do you want to buy bargains to save money, but also when you're adapting lenses, a lot of these adapted lenses that you put on your camera are going to have odd lens mounts. Some of them are going to project too far into your camera and can actually damage the mechanical shutter mechanism. So when you're fooling around with adapting lenses, what I'm trying to say is there's a greater chance of you damaging your camera. So what would you rather do? Damage a $100 camera or damage a $2,000 camera? Well, obviously, well, especially while you're learning, I think you're going to want to have a more inexpensive camera while you're learning so that you don't damage it. So here's some tips for me to find inexpensive cameras. DSLR cameras are bigger, they're thicker, and they're kind of out of favor. And mirrorless cameras are more popular these days. Well, of course, if if you are okay with buying a DSLR camera, you're probably going to get the same features in a mirrorless for a lot cheaper. When it comes to megapixels, I find that 10 to 16 megapixels is enough for me. A lot of people buy way more megapixels than they really need. If you can afford it and you want it, sure. But if you can get by with 10 to 16, maybe even 20 megapixels, you're going to save a bunch of money. Also, you're going to save money if a company is in financial trouble, if they're not doing that well. For example, Olympus, Pentax, and Nikon are all having some financial issues, and you're going to find that cameras from a company that has financial issues are going to be cheaper than a company that's growing and making a lot of money. And final tip for saving money is get a camera that is 2 or 3 generations old. I've found that in the last 5 to 10 years, cameras really haven't improved all that much. Their improvements and their feature improvements have been incremental. So you can get a 5, a 10-year-old camera, even a 15-year-old camera that does a great job and you're probably going to be happy with. Well, I'd like to wrap things up today in our discussion on what camera to buy for your adapted lens by saying, do your research. Do your research. There are some cameras out there that are lemons, and you want to stay away from them. For example, the Nikon D600 is known for having oil on their sensors. The Leica M9 has a sensor that rusts, and the Sony A7 has light leaks and shutter shock. So do your homework so you don't get a lemon. And at the end of this episode, I have posted a number of links to internet camera reviews, camera ratings, and camera checklists that will all help you to select the right camera, just the perfect camera for your adapted lenses.